Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lucy and I share videos on the topic of long COVID, chronic fatigue syndrome and mind-body approaches that can help people with those conditions. I also offer coaching for people who are struggling with chronic fatigue syndrome, long COVID or a similar condition who are interested in using a mind-body approach. So today's video, I wanted to talk about perfectionism. It seems like this is something a lot of people struggle with, and in particular, I wanted to talk about 8 ways that perfectionism can affect your recovery. This video is not medical advice or mental health advice. I'm just sharing ideas that have helped me. And I'm talking about perfectionism in relation to using a mind-body approach and how this can show up. So before I begin, perfectionism can be really healthy. It can help us to be driven, set goals, achieve goals, be very productive people. So perfectionism is not necessarily a bad thing, but perfectionism can also get in the way of making progress in your recovery. So the first way that it can impact recovery is that you are overworking or overdoing because you're so driven to get something done. So this could, for example, look like researching to find an answer, and this could take up a lot of time. You might find some research and start digging a hole by researching something within that research paper, or finding an idea and wanting to expand on that idea, so having to research a subsection, and it can become a bottomless pit of trying to figure out what's going to help, and it can be very time consuming and take up quite a lot of our time when we're trying to figure out what's wrong. And it seems to be really common in people with long COVID or chronic fatigue syndrome. They do so much research and they end up knowing more than the doctors they're going to see because they have done so much extensive reading on the matter. And of course this can be helpful, but also it can take up a lot of time and it can get us into that fix-it mentality. And being in a fix-it mentality is not helpful in terms of using a mind-body approach. Because with a mind-body approach, we're not looking for external solutions, and by looking for external solutions, we are going on some type of belief or idea that we don't have the answer, or a mind-body approach is not going to work for us. So the second tendency as a perfectionist could be not being able to see anything as an achievement in terms of your progress. So when we're a perfectionist, we often think about what we want as an end outcome. So what we have right now doesn't feel good enough. So even though maybe you've already made quite a lot of progress and you've learned quite a lot, you're disregarding that and you're not considering it an achievement. And this can be harmful in the sense that then you're thinking quite negatively about the situation and about how you're doing. You might even be telling yourself that I'm not making any progress, or this isn't working for me, because you are thinking about the fact that you haven't achieved the end goal. You're not thinking about all of the minor goals you have achieved and the milestones that you've reached. And as a whole, we want to be thinking optimistically rather than pessimistically about recovery and about our chance at getting better in general. So the third thing that can impact us in terms of perfectionism is that we compare ourselves to others. And if we see a recovery story where someone has recovered or done really well, and that hasn't been our experience, we might feel as though we're not doing well and we're not achieving, and we can beat ourselves up. Again, we can start thinking quite negatively, or we can become pessimistic about our recovery and what we will be able to do. And rather than thinking about the fact that if someone else has managed to do it, we can do it, even if that's in a different way to that other person. So another way that perfectionism can affect us is that we feel pressure to meet the standards of others, and we can even interpret other people's standards as different to what they are. So for instance, if a friend asks, "How are you doing? How are you feeling any better since the last time I saw you?" They might be asking from a place of concern, of just being curious, of hoping that you're feeling a bit better. But if you're a perfectionist, you could interpret that as, oh, they want a report on how I'm doing, and I'm not able to tell them that I achieved X, Y, and Z, or that now I'm out running and that I'm back to work or whatever. So we can end up seeing it as a failure and misinterpreting what people are really asking, and assume they're insinuating certain things that they're not. And that can make us feel like we're failing, even though that's not what the conversation was actually about. Another way that perfectionism can affect us is that we are overly focused on order and organization and preparation. So this might mean that before you start using a mind-body approach, you want to read all of the information first. So you want to read every book, you want to read all of the research, maybe you want to listen to any podcast on this topic before you take action and before you start, because you want to make sure you have all the information before you do anything so that you don't make a mistake. But actually, with using a mind-body approach, it's important to learn as you're doing, and this can just put off taking action, and also expecting that it's going to be really controlled when we take action, which isn't always the case. It can sometimes look kind of messy. When we're using a mind-body approach, it doesn't always go perfectly smoothly the whole time. Another way that perfectionism can affect us is that we don't feel like we're good enough or worthy. And in particular, with being unwell, we might see our illness as a reason why we're failing in life, that you're not capable of doing the things that you normally did, and that you see achievement as your self-worth. So the fact that you're not achieving because you're unwell means that you see yourself as less worthy or less valuable, and you might assume that others see you in that way as well. And it can be hard to feel like you have a high sense of self-esteem, because you're normally used to getting that self-esteem from achieving things and from doing well, even though maybe it's never good enough because you're a perfectionist. You're used to your achievements being noticed to some extent. Another outcome of being a perfectionist is anxiety. So unfortunately, with perfectionism, we don't have a realistic expectation of how something will go. And so when things don't go perfectly, which they won't because the world is not perfect, then we feel like we're failing. And rather than seeing that as just a blip and we can get up and keep moving, it affects us much more. We might start to have thoughts that are more generalized, like I'm never going to get better, or this approach isn't working, or I need to start again from the very start, rather than carrying on what I was doing, because it's that black and white thinking, all or nothing, wanting to get every step right. But in order to get better, we have to have failures along the way. That's just naturally part of the process. And sometimes things don't go well, and we can't control everything. But because you feel like you can't control everything, it can make you feel quite anxious, and you want to make the right next step. So if you're increasing activity, you want it to go well, and there might be extra anxiety around the expectations of wanting that activity to go well using a mind-body approach. And that can also feed into a fear cycle of fearing doing more because you want it to go well, and it feels like high stakes if it doesn't go well. And then the last one is related to this. So it is the fear of making mistakes. Mistakes are inevitable when using a mind-body approach, in terms of you can't avoid having symptoms when you're increasing activity. Some people will have less symptoms, and that's great if that's you. But for a lot of people, they increase activity and their symptoms do increase, and they have to try and manage that. And if you see that as a failure, or if you see that as imperfect, an imperfect way of recovering, then it's going to be a big barrier to you progressing and moving forward. Noticing the expectations that you have and how perfectionism might be affecting your recovery in these ways could be helpful. Perfectionism isn't something that you can change overnight. It takes time, but if you are aware of it, that's at least very helpful for knowing how it might be affecting your progress and affecting your ability to apply this approach. And it can be really helpful to have an outside perspective on how perfectionism might be affecting you, or problem solving some of your perfectionist tendencies around recovery, because when that's your normal way of living day to day, it can be hard to have that perspective, and it can be hard to notice how it might be holding you back in terms of recovery. I offer coaching, and this is something I can help people with. So if you do think you would benefit from that, feel free to click the link in the description below. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe. If you'd like to join the Facebook group where people are also trying this mind-body approach, there's a link in the description. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.